Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. And Senator, it's good to have you this morning. Thanks very much for being here. I saw a tweet that you put out this morning about China opening its movie theaters and then closing them again. And you raised questions about whether or not, in fact, the pandemic is gone in China. Are they still lying?
Yes, Maria, the Chinese Communist Party is still lying. Back in January, I knew that this virus had the potential to become a worldwide pandemic for two reasons. Not because I'm a scientist or an epidemiologist, but because I could see, one, how the Chinese Communist Party was lying, and two, the dramatic, extreme measures they were taking, like locking in 75 million people into their homes and apartment buildings. Those two things simply did not line up. You see it again today. So, for instance, China says they have no more new cases, no more new deaths, yet they just closed all movie theaters nationwide only a few days after having opened them up. Or look at some of the mortuaries in Wuhan itself. They say they've only had 2,500 cases that have resulted in deaths or so, yet a single mortuary has ordered more than 5,000 urns. You can look at these basic facts to know that the Chinese Communist Party is still lying today as they were in December and January, and that's why what could have been a local health problem in Wuhan turned into a global pandemic from which more than 2,000 Americans have now died.
Wow. And in fact, you had questioned how it originated from the beginning. You joined me 1 month ago, and I asked you how this started. And here's what you said. Listen to this. I've got to get your reaction to this. Watch.
We don't know where it originated, but we do know that we have to get to the bottom of that. We also know that just a few miles away from that food market is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. Now, we don't have evidence that this disease originated there, but because of China's duplicity and dishonesty from the beginning, we need to at least ask the question to see what the evidence says. And China right now is not giving any evidence on that question at all.
In fact, Senator, they did not allow the CDC in to get to the bottom of it, to investigate how this originated, the severity of it. Can you tell us more about this super lab, this level 4 biochemical lab that you mentioned in Wuhan? What do they do there?
Yeah, Maria, it's not just that they won't allow the CDC into the country. They also have kicked out reporters from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. That's the hallmark of a communist government that is trying to cover up the biggest story in the world. What we know now is about the same as what we knew a month ago, very little. We do know that the virus did not originate in that food market or the wet market or whatever you want to call it in Wuhan. Even the Chinese Communist Party has now acknowledged that. All the way back in December, though, we knew that origin story was a myth. The Lancet published a study of the first 40 cases of coronavirus, and 14 of them had no contact with that market. So the virus went into that market, which acted as an accelerant before it came out of that market. As for what's happened in that biosafety level 4 laboratory, the super lab in Wuhan, we still don't know because the Chinese Communist Party refuses to come clean. We do know that they have researched coronaviruses, and there are legitimate reasons to research coronaviruses, trying to identify perhaps therapeutic drugs or vaccines, but we don't know the origin of this virus still to this day.
Well, one thing we do know is an incredible reliance on China for some of the most important things that our country needs. I'm talking about pharmaceuticals, and the active ingredients in our prescription drugs are made in China. How incredible is this? And how long has this been going on in terms of this incredible reliance on China? So much so that in the middle of this virus, Beijing-run media, state-run media, came out with a story saying, well, maybe the communist government will withhold those prescription drugs right now from America just when they need it.
Yeah, it's a true scandal, Maria, going back 30 years. This is part of the thing that President Trump means when he says our leaders were so foolish for so long to outsource so much of our basic productive capacity to China. I think most Americans have been shocked to learn that we depend upon China for things like penicillin, antibiotics, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, to say nothing of dozens of basic pharmaceutical ingredients. That's why I have legislation that would insist that we stop our reliance on China, that we bring back that manufacturing capability to the United States and give tax incentives for people who do that, that we use the federal government's purchasing power through agencies and programs like Medicare, Medicaid, the Department of Defense, and the VA to create a domestic market for pharmaceuticals made in America, and that we ultimately cut off the imports of all Chinese drugs.
And in fact, the Chinese are attacking the U.S. for calling it the Wuhan virus, even though it in fact did originate in Wuhan. It is the Chinese virus, correct?
It did originate in Wuhan. The Chinese Communist Party has had a deliberate misinformation campaign in capitals all around the world. Their ambassadors have been alleging that the U.S. Army created this and spread it in Wuhan last year. That's one reason why it's so important that we be clear and that we not succumb to politically correct demands that we call it anything other than the China virus or the Wuhan virus, while China is actively spreading disinformation around the world.
Real quick, do you think China will be held accountable for this disease given the downplaying of it from the start?
Yes, Maria, they will. When they lose things like the manufacturing capacity that we've outsourced to them, or when other democratic governments around the world respond to their peoples who know that China is responsible for this virus.
It's great to see you this morning. Tom Cotton, thank you.